comment. President Obama's wrapping up his 3-day trip to India in the midst of a larger 4-country Asian trip. He's headed to Indonesia tomorrow, to South Korea and Japan. We're talking about the significance of the India trip now with Professor Vijay Prashad, who teaches South Asian history and international studies at Trinity College and Hartford. I want to turn back to some of what President Obama said on Saturday. He was addressing the business summit in Mumbai.
And there still exists a caricature of India as a land of call centers and back offices that cost American jobs. That's a real perception. Here in India, I know that many still see the arrival of American companies and products as a threat to small shopkeepers and to India's ancient and proud culture. But these old stereotypes, these old concerns, ignore today's reality. Trade between our countries is not just a one-way street of American jobs and companies moving to India. It is a dynamic, two-way relationship that is creating jobs, growth, and higher living standards in both our countries. And that is the truth. The United States sees an opportunity to sell our exports in one of the fastest-growing markets in the world. For America, this is a job strategy.
Well, the Indian Prime Minister Manmohan Singh held a joint news conference with Obama on Monday in New Delhi. He also talked about strengthening economic ties between the U.S. and India.
India is not in the business of stealing jobs from the United States of America. Our outsourcing industry, I believe, has helped to improve the productive capacity and productivity of American industry. And the new deals that have been struck, they all happen to be in infrastructure. And infrastructure today is the biggest bottleneck to the faster growth of India, to the faster growth of employment. And therefore, these deals that the President has mentioned are truly an example of trade being a win-win situation for both our countries.
Vijay, your response, President Obama's trip as a job strategy for the United States and the discussion on outsourcing.
Well, the question of outsourcing has always been more, fire than light. It's not really been such a big part of either the Indian economy or the American economy itself. That is just the outsourcing to India. As the people in India have said for the last 5-6 years, that India is being blamed for what is happening with the outsourcing of manufacturing jobs to China. So this is a question that needs to be dealt with some empirical data. It's not enough just to have, this idea of outsourcing as a great boogeyman against, the new globalized relations, etc. So I don't feel like the outsourcing question should be front and center. There are other issues. For instance, right there on the streets in New Delhi, cotton farmers have been protesting. They've been protesting not only because of subsidies in the United States that prevent Indian cotton and textiles from coming in, but also they are protesting against the entry into India of large agro-businesses like Monsanto that are trying to upgrade Indian agriculture, which means that, you have much more expensive fertilizers, much more expensive irrigation systems. In a sense, you get in industrial agriculture, and it works against small farmers. So there are other issues that should be at the center of our discussion. I've always felt that outsourcing was the red herring. In that way, I agree with both the Indian Prime Minister and with Barack Obama that outsourcing is not the real issue. The problem is that neither Dr. Manmohan Singh nor President Obama took on the real issues, which are questions of big agro-business and subsidies. It's very ironic, by the way, that we now see the United States asking India to, allow it to invest there for a job strategy in America, and India is asking America to cut back on subsidies. Until about 2 or 3 years ago, the demands were exactly reversed.
talking about this issue of agriculture, one of the things that President Obama has been saying is that India should be a model for food sovereignty and talking about ushering a permanent green revolution. Talk a little bit more about these agriculture deals and what it means to say that India is a model for food sovereignty when the vast majority of its citizens live well below the poverty line.
Yes, it's not that there is insufficient food grains produced in India. The question is that most people don't have enough in their pockets to buy those grains. In fact, perversely, the Indian government has been thinking of exporting food grains, even though starvation and hunger in India are at very high levels. The real question coming from these agro-business companies like Monsanto and Cargill is the question of proprietary rights. The United States and India signed a very hush-hush agreement in 2005 called the Umbrella Science Agreement. And this was the move to push the Indian the intellectual property law from a question of Creative Commons or open licensing to very restrictive private control of patents. This has been a big issue between the two countries, especially, not so much the two countries, it's a big issue between the agro-business firms and the Indian government. And once more, the American government is brought into the position of having to lobby for agro-business firms to push for India to, as it were, not strengthen, but change its intellectual property regime from one that was in the public domain to one that will move everything into the private domain. So when we talk about agriculture, we're not really talking about seeds and farmers. What we're really talking about here is property rights over things like seeds, property rights over things like fertilizer, etc. So it's not about the actual things itself, it's about who gets to control them, who gets to own them, and therefore who gets to set a price when they sell it to small farmers who increasingly are unable to buy the goods that come with these kind of patents.
Professor Prashad, the amount of money that is going into the arms race, the nuclear arms race between Pakistan and India, the U.S. has decided to support India for full membership of the top 4 nuclear clubs, including the Nuclear Suppliers Group. Can you talk about how one fuels the other?
Well, this is a kind of a disturbing development, and it's linked as well to the Afghan conflict. In other words, there are very many unsettled questions that bedevil India and Pakistan. Kashmir is one of them. The role of both countries in Afghanistan is another. The question of the border itself is an unsettled question. So rather than move from those questions forward, the United States government and India have upped the arms race on the border. American support for India's nuclear ambitions have, of course, threatened Islamabad. On the other side, America's reticence to pressure Islamabad on questions like the David Headley extradition to India, on questions like the shutting down of the organizations involved in the 2008 attack in Mumbai. These silences and actions have threatened to increase and intensify distrust between New Delhi and Islamabad. In other words, there are some very clear issues that both India and Pakistan need to put their heads together and start dealing with. In fact, during the press conference, Dr. Manmohan Singh said that India is not afraid to discuss what he called the K word, in other words, Kashmir. So let these be the leading parts of the equation and not questions of arms deals or pressuring India to enter into the Afghan conflict in a much more forward way, which is once again going to threaten Islamabad and defeat any possibility of confidence building between India and Pakistan.